Welcome everyone. Welcome back to the International Fortepiano Online Salon. This is our fourth salon, and today's title is Women Composers, the Salonnières in the 18th and 19th century. We'll also have a panel discussion called Women in Music, Has Anything Changed? Led by Vanessa Rose. Our co-host today is Patricia Garcia Hill, coming from Florence, Italy. I am speaking to you from New Jersey, and Maria is in upstate New York. The convivial piece you just heard was by a notable historical salonière, Madame Brion, and played on harpsichord and square piano by me and Rebecca Sipis of Rutgers University. Madame Brion's Parisian salons were avidly frequented by Benjamin Franklin during his time in France, as he was trying to gather support for the American Revolutionary War. You'll hear a beautiful song by Madame Brion in today's program, sung by the gorgeous soprano Sonia Headlam. The online Fortepiano Salon was conceived during the pandemic so that the Fortepiano and music community continue to meet and share ideas and performances with you, our audience. Thankfully, technology gave us a way to find even greater contact with each other, and we have people watching from all over the world and musicians performing for us. So please say hello to us and each other right now by rating your name, where you're watching from, and what you do in music in your Facebook or YouTube chat boxes. We would love to hear from you. Now, here's my host, Maria Rose.
Thank you, Yiheng, and welcome to everyone to this fourth salon. I'm talking to you from the Catskill region, not far from the Piano Museum, where we started our workshop and which led to this salon, and is hosted by the Catskill Mountain Foundation, and where we are hoping this summer in August to have another workshop. So stay tuned, please, for events to come. So today, as Yiheng mentioned, we have a very special program focusing on women composers, women performers, and the Salonnière in particular. The Salonnière really, in the 18th, 19th century, they were the movers and shakers of musical society in many societies and in large communities, as Paris and Berlin and elsewhere. And there are many examples. For example, when Franz Liszt would come to Paris, the first thing would be to be invited by the Salonnière, where reputations were made and connections were made, and where one could establish a career and then go on to other big things. A very famous example is also Fanny Mendelssohn, who hosted a very important salon in Berlin for many years, and not only limited to performers, solo performers, but even orchestras and choral performances. And it was a veritable institution, and many of these salons led eventually to concert societies and orchestra organizations, etc. So they were an important link in the cable to bringing us to where our music world is today. Now the salon tradition goes back to all the way to Florence in the Renaissance period, where they had the camerata, and this is very appropriate because our special co-host today is in Florence, and which is where we will go. And before I hand it over to her, I just want to remind you that there's a program with a lot of information about all the performers and composers. And if you have trouble finding it, please let us know and we'll make sure that you will find it. And now we will go to Patricia Garcia Hill, our special host in Florence. Hi, Patricia.
Hello.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Accademia Bartolomeo Cristofori, la collezione che suona, meaning the collection that sounds, because most of its instruments are in playable condition. I am really excited to be here co-hosting this wonderful event with Maria and Yichen, who are actually salonières of the 21st century, as they said, thanks to the technology that are allowing us to be together. So Thank you for counting on me for this wonderful opportunity, letting me share my beloved place with everyone. So, as Maria said, the Salon was an invention, an Italian invention of the 17th century that then flourished throughout Europe in the next centuries. Actually, even after the 19th century, it takes the form of home concerts, and today, the Zoom concerts. So, there you go. It's really, really exciting to think about it that way. So, focusing on the 18th and 19th century, and that's the theme of today's program, there is a particular composer that attracted my attention because she was not only a Salonnière but also probably one of the first freelance musicians in the music history. Her name is Marianne von Martinez. And she was not only an inspiring host organizing these gatherings, but also a highly accomplished musician, performer, and composer. She was born in Vienna in 1744, although she had Spanish origins. She was the author of the only symphony composed by a woman in the classical period in music. Her father was friend of the Italian poet known as Metastasio, and they lived in the same building in Vienna, where also Nicola Porpora and a young struggling composer named Haydn lived. So the lives of all these people came to be connected through Marianne. And then she and her sister looked after Metastasio to the end of his days. And when he passed, he left all his estate to them, including his music library and his harpsichord, allowing them to live as freelance musicians and organizing. This is why they could organize these wonderful gatherings, musical events at their home, which of course attracted the most distinguished guests, such as Mozart, who composed 4 hands piano sonatas to perform with her. So I would like to play straight away one of her sonatas, one of the 2 sonatas that she composed specifically for the fortepiano, although you can also listen to it on a harpsichord and works perfectly. So this is the sonata in A major by Marianne von Martinez. So this is one of my favorite instruments of the collection. This is Johann Schanz. Johann, sorry. Johann was the son of Wenzel Schanz, the actual founder of the company in Vienna. This fortepiano here was built around 1800 and it arrived in really good condition to the collection, so the sound should be quite faithful to the original one. The compass of the instrument is nearly 6 octaves already. It has 2 knee levels, the imper and moderator, and 1 hand stop for the bassoon, which is not in use, although, as I said, it was in really good condition. The rest of them is all original. So these instruments, and this is the reason why I've chosen this instrument to perform Marianne's music, were tied to the figure of Haydn, and we have proof of that on the letters that he wrote to his students, I must say most of them female, recommending the instruments because of their expressivity and warmth in tone that I hope you were able to appreciate. And now I would like to say something about the collection since we are here. It was born, the Accademia Bartolomeo Cristofori was born in 1989 after an idea of Stefano Fiuzzi, who is the collector and owner of the instruments and the artistic director of the Academy. He was also my former teacher and a life and musical reference for me. And so thank you for letting me represent in the Academy. So what I wanted to say is that this collection has a very particular philosophy, and this is why the name of the collection, That Sounds, makes sense, which is that there is nothing more instinctive that the sound preserved, the sound and the technique preserved in the original instruments to understand a period of history and the music that was composed for them, for these instruments. And then this is why if we learn the fortepiano and we are lucky to experience different fortepianos as we can hear, then we get more imaginative and creative, and we can also contribute to the contemporary music scene. So this was the idea of Stefano, and I completely share it with him. Now, let me please introduce you to some of the instruments that are close to me. The collection is a little bit bigger, and if you're interested, you can ask me later, and I'll try to be helpful. But the connection only allows me to present you the instruments that are close to me. So here we have one of the 2 graphs that belong to the collection. This one is the later one with a serial number of 1041, and it was built around 1828, I think, 1826 maybe. I'm saying this because the other one is earlier and it has a quite rare serial number, which is 364, but the difference in time between the two instruments is only 6 years, so it gives you an idea of the amount of instruments that were built in the Graf's factory. Remember that they were handmade, so it's quite a lot of instruments. This one here, as well as the other, has 6 octaves and 5 pedals. The damper, una corda, moderator, the bassoon, and the janissary. So, but this one, it's still, even if it's only 6 years, it was built only 6 years later, you can still hear a wider dynamic range and probably more a more powerful sound. Now a little bit of moderator. And then okay, and then una corda. Well, I think it's quite difficult to appreciate it from here, but these instruments were praised by Beethoven, Schubert, Schumann, Chopin, and even Liszt has that famous picture of him sitting at one of the Graf's instruments that represents the Salon of the 19th century. Now, this one here, it's Koenig, who was one of the most well-known fortepiano builders in the Vienna of Stein, Walter, and Schanz. And probably its main feature is the fact that it's really well balanced between the treble and the bass. It also has, no, this one is smaller, it's only 5 octaves, but it also has the 2 knee levers. So as you see, it's really balanced, differently than the Schanz that has more distinctive tones in the register, in the different registers. So this one here is a Stein, but a Carl Stein, who was the nephew of Nanette and the son of Andreas Stein. Also, it is built in Vienna around 1830. So Carl Stein was the one who bought the Graf's factory in 1841. And this one here has this particularity, which is like this hole where you can hide your music or things. So, yeah. Now here we have one of the two players of the collection. This one was built in 1847, and it has almost 7 octaves, some metal frames that make it more powerful and reliable in tuning. And even so, it still keeps a refined version of the single escapement, even if the double escapement mechanism was invented in 1803 by Gerard. But you'll listen to it later when I will perform at the end of the program. Now, we move to the last one that I can introduce you, which is this Bösendorfer, that built in the same year as the Pleyel, so 1847, I said. And this one here, it's much more powerful, and it has a solid mechanism, and it has more metal frames, and yeah. So. So again, coming back to Liszt, even if we know that he loved the art, he also said about the Bösendorfer instruments that were the only ones capable of resisting his vigorous technique. I hope you have enjoyed it, and well, I will be responding to questions if you have any at the end of the program. So now I'll let you hear the other wonderful performers and wonderful composers of this evening. I mean, then for you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I feel like I'm a little bit in Florence with you, and it's such a treat to see the instruments. And I loved the Martinez Sonata, and you brought out all the pathos and wit and charm of that amazing piece. So beautifully played. Thank you. It's my pleasure now to welcome Sonia Hedlum, who is an amazing soprano here in New Jersey as well, like me. And she's going to be talking about Madame Brillon. And we are both a part of a group called the Raritan Chamber Players, led by Rebecca Sipus at Rutgers University. And we recently came out with an album about the music of Madame Brillon. Sonia, welcome.
Thank you so much, Yiheng. It's a pleasure to join you all. And I'm really happy to have this opportunity to share with you and the audience about Anne-Louise Boivin d'Adancourt Brillon de Jouy, also known as Madame Brillon, as we call her. She's a woman who was little known and performed until just recently, due to the extensive work and research of our dear friend and colleague, Rebecca Sipus, who you just mentioned. And I know we don't have much time today, but I do want to give our audience a little sense of Madame Brillon's life and music. She was born in 1744, a member of the aristocracy, and she hosted a popular salon in Paris, where many guests, philosophers, musicians, and diplomats such as Benjamin Franklin, I think you mentioned that also at the top of this panel discussion today, came to her salon to enjoy food and music and conversation. She was an accomplished keyboardist, and by the 1760s, we know she owned an English square piano, nearly identical to the one that you will hear played by Rebecca Sipus in the song selection that we'll listen to shortly. Madame Brillon was also a composer, and she composed duos and trios for piano and harpsichord and wrote songs. And all of these compositions were performed by family and friends in her home at her salon. And the song that we'll listen to today has characteristics that are typical of her songs. It's strophic, with simple poetry that evokes the pastoral. The original manuscript has a fully worked out piano part. And I'm sure many in our audience know this, but for those of you that might not know, it was much more common at this time to see scores with figured bass. So Madame Brillon may be one of the first in France to actually write songs with a full keyboard figuration. You'll hear in the selection that we'll play shortly that she takes full advantage of the harp-like quality of the square piano. And she writes simple yet lyrical melodies and harmonies that capture the sentiments of the text. So I hope everyone enjoys this selection, Viens m'aider, au Dieu d'amour. This is one of Madame Brion's songs that is featured on the recently released album by the Raritan Players.
Thank you. The beautiful singer you just heard is one of our panelists today, Sonia Headlam and Rebecca Sipis on the square piano. Thank you so much for that little song by Madame Brion. Next, I'd like to welcome Gilly Loftus, who is a wonderful colleague and forte pianist in Montreal. Gilly, welcome to the Salon, and tell us about Marianne von Augenbrugger, who you'll be playing today.
Yes, well, hi, Heng, and hi, everyone. It's a real thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be, to be here. I've been a passionate, avid virtual salon goer for the past few salons, so I'm excited to be here today in this capacity. My earbud keep popping out. Sorry.
Great to have you.
Thanks. So I'm just a few short words. So about the excerpt that we'll be hearing from Marianne's sonata. So Marianne von Augenbrugger, together with her elder sister Katharina, were both very well-known keyboardists and musicians in Vienna at the turn of the 18th century. In the program, you'll notice that Marianne, in fact, died very young, so she was 23. And revisiting this material in preparation for today, I realized that the recording that you'll hear, I myself was 23 at the time. You'll also notice less gray hair, perhaps. But this sonata was published posthumously, so after Mariana had died, and it's quite a touching publication. So the sonata was published together with an ode that was set to music by Salieri, who was the teacher of Mariana and Caterina as well. As I was, again, revisiting this material, two things came up that I found quite interesting, and I thought perhaps to share with you all today, and you might also find interesting. One of them actually has to do with Caterina, so the elder sister who outlived Mariana and went on to host her own salon as she married and hosted a salon in Vienna into the 19th century, and so continuing the Auenbrugger tradition of musical gatherings. The other point of interest was that it seemed to me that the Auenbrugger household must have been a very unique, supportive, encouraging environment. So for the two sisters to have this support to pursue their musical and otherwise interests. Their father was a distinguished physician who clearly, I imagine, must have been a very encouraging man. The person who was missing from the picture is their mother, who I couldn't really find much information about at all. And in thinking of the theme that we're perhaps exploring today and this wonderful salon, this visibility and invisibility of women, I thought it was quite curious that we have two very visible daughters and a very invisible mother. And that's just something I've been thinking about ever since I kind of came to mind. So I share it now with you. And that's it. Time for music, probably.
This is an excerpt from a sonata by Marianne von Auenbrugger.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was fantastic. Thank you, Billy. Now we're going back to Boston and to Vivian Montgomery, who is going to introduce us to the music of a very important French pianist on the turn of the 18th, 19th century, Hélène de Montgeroux, who was born an aristocrat and lived in miraculous ways through the whole revolutionary time. And I believe that because of the revolution, there was an upheaval in society. She had, for at least a period of time, a kind of agency, and that was unusual for a woman of her time. That was not necessarily felt by other women. And she was an incredibly serious composer and evidently a very good pianist. Welcome, Vivian. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's delightful to be part of this with such wonderful, wonderful colleagues and hearing such wonderful music as well. So I'll just say a few things about Hélène Marquise de Montgeroux. She was quite vocally opposed to the way that some of her contemporaries indulged in dashing virtuoso displays on the piano. She promoted a much more refined and musically inspired piano style. She placed an emphasis on the pursuit of a cantabile style, imitating the Italian bel canto vocal style in a manner that's generally associated with later piano composers in Paris, such as Chopin and Thalberg. Montgeroux was among the first group of piano professors at the Paris Conservatoire when it was founded in 1795. And she was the first woman to be appointed on the highest level at the highest salary. She also stepped outside of norms by teaching a class of entirely male students. She was known for her own performance as a very expressive cantabile pianist. And this became the focus of her monumental teaching method, her 1820 complete course for learning the fortepiano. This consists of 3 large volumes, 972 exercises, and it's divided into 17 chapters. Each one deals with a different topic and is accompanied by lengthy introductions and observations about music writ large, about playing, and about expression and flexibility. Volumes 2 and 3 of this work, of her Cours Complète, consists of 114 etudes, many of which are brilliant compositions. Each of them is preceded by instructions, and some of which are considerable in length. So this rather extraordinary treatise lays out a carefully organized plan for mastering the instrument. This is not for basic instruction. She gives detailed descriptions of many aspects of piano technique while integrating them with pronouncements on style and taste. More than 1/3 of these etudes focus on this practice of cantabile playing in both slow and fast movements. She maintains that the piano is capable of singing by using a certain amount of illusion, and that the best way to achieve the illusion of sustained sounds is the use of tempo rubato. Many of her markings, her ideas of illusion through rubato and rhythmic interpretation, articulation over legato, many of these parallel much of what we know about harpsichord technique. And Montgeroux also dealt with the pedal quite reluctantly. There's only one etude, her very last etude, that's devoted to pedal technique. The first etude that you'll hear borrows strongly from Bach. You'll recognize that right away. So I used it to create a bridge between the 2 instrumental realms, my 2 instrumental realms, by recording it on both harpsichord and on a Stein Mozart era fortepiano. The other 2 etudes that are performed on harpsichord demonstrate Montgeroux's utilization of articulation and grouping markings that are akin to Baroque sources, and also show her very able and lively exploitation of Baroque dance forms. For two of the more romantic etudes, which still touch upon elements of earlier textures and counterpoint, I perform on a Broadwood square, which I believe captures the simplicity and warmth of Montgeroux's pianistic medium. So I could say much more, but let's listen to some of these pieces.
Oh, that was fantastic. Thank you, Vivian. And Hélène de Montjoux is such an important figure. Her method was used for years by generations of pianists in France. And so I'm very happy to quickly segue to probably one of her proteges, at least if she didn't study with Madame de Montjoux, at least she was very much part of her circle and under her influence and was often compared with her. This is Marie Bigot. And here we have Lucie de Saint-Vincent in Utrecht in the Netherlands, who is going to introduce her two of her etudes. Welcome, Lucie.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. Yeah, the light is now going down because here it's quite late already. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me here. I'm very happy, like everyone, to share all this about women composer with all of you, and especially to hear all this music. That's the most important in the end. I'm indeed very happy to introduce Marie Bigot, which there is no evidence indeed that she studied with Hélène de Montjoux. There is still in a quotation of Marmontel in his book about famous pianists in the chapter about Hélène de Montjoux. He still says that she was her émule, which I don't know how to translate that properly in English, but it can be ambiguous. It can say that she was a student, but it's for sure she has been very influenced. Marie Bigot was born just before the revolution, the French Revolution, in Colmar in Alsace. And actually she come from a musician family, and she first learned music with her mother, and then they went to Switzerland, to Neuchâtel, which was a very important center there. But she also went to Paris and studied composition with Cherubini and Aubert, and probably there is a big chance that she studied also with Hélène de Montjoux. And she's also a very good link between the woman composer we heard from Vienna before, because she spent 4 years in Vienna when she married with Paul Bigot de Morogue, which then was from the nobility, which for her was quite probably big ascension because she was not an aristocrat. And when she went there, she had access through the employer of her husband to all the Salon and the high society of Vienna, and she met there Beethoven and Salieri. She was very good friend with Salieri also, and Haydn, and they all were very impressed by her playing. She was for sure a very accomplished pianist and also a composer, and she probably studied also with Beethoven, or at least they had musical exchanges. And there is this famous story that she could read on her autograph, the Appassionata, and he was so impressed by her playing, where he said it was even more what he expected than what he wrote on the paper, that he also presented her autograph before she went back to Paris. That's why it's now at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. And all this to say that, and when she was in Vienna, she composed and she published her first sonata, her only sonata actually. There she didn't publish so many of her works, not all at least. And then she went back in 1809 to Paris. And there she studied her school, let's say. She studied to teach for also reasons, because her husband was made prisoner in the Napoleon's War, and she had to find money for sustain her family. But she was also abroad a famous pedagogue, and she very probably used Hélène de Montjoux method, which was published at the time where she was teaching in Paris. And for instance, the kids of the Mendelssohn family, Fanny and Félix, studied with her when they had them trip in Paris around 1816. Now you're going to listen to two of her etudes that I played last December in the Relvink Museum in the Netherlands. during the Beethoven Festival, where I played a program featuring women composer around Beethoven, or which then played a lot of Beethoven. Like that's the case of Marie Bigot. When she came back to France, she had also her own salon, and she performed a lot of Beethoven's music, as well as Hélène de Montgeroux did it too. And so you will hear the first or third etude, and then the first etudes, which are etudes published 2 years before she died at age 34, so quite young. And you can really feel the romanticism already going there. I play there on a Stein piano, Andreas Stein piano for 1803 from the Relvink Museum, which actually, because on this concert I also perform a sonata, which was played in Vienna exactly, if I'm published in Vienna at this time, so it was fitting very well. And to conclude, I will just have one little story about this sonata that I played once when they were still public in the audience. And after the concert, one person in the public came to me and said, "Oh, about the second movement of the sonata," he said, "Oh, I had the feeling sometimes to hear some Chopin." And I say that to link it to what just said Viviane Montgomery about the fact of this, I don't know if we can call it French school, but this line coming from Hélène de Montgeroux and the cantabile and the legato and the bel canto, which I found it at the time this very interesting that someone of the public mentioned this after having played this second movement. Thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy.
So, well done, everyone. I'm enjoying so much listening to some pieces that deserve to be heard and played so well by wonderful performers as you are. So, bravissime tutte. Now, I've chosen this piano, this playel, this wonderful instrument to perform Pauline Garcia Viardot, because this piano was built by Camille Pleyel, who was a friend of Chopin. So was Pauline, a close friend of him. And as you probably know, Chopin used to say, when I feel alive and strong enough to find my own sound, I need a Pleyel piano. And I really agree with, this is probably the other, my other favorite instrument from the collection. Then the piece that I will perform, Serenade, was the type of pieces that were performed during the 19th century salons. Short, pianistic, virtuosistic, and romantic pieces. And it was then when the music became the means of the salon. Around 1830, the notion of salon music emerged as an independent genre. So, just to say, Pauline Garcia Viardot was born in 1821, and she was a French pianist, composer, and singer, and a leading figure of the late 19th century music life throughout Europe. She was born into a musical family. Her father was a famous vocal pedagogue, and her sister, Maria Malibran, was one of the most adored opera singers of her time. But also Pauline made significant contributions to the operatic stage, the composition world, and the music salons that she often held at home. And through those salons, she had great influence on many European composers, well-known composers like Chopin, who, as I said, was a close friend, and also advised her on her piano playing and compositions. And she, in return, transcribed into vocal songs his 12 mazurkas. So now you will listen to Serenade from 2 piano pieces by Pauline Garcia Viardot.
Bravo. And I think we all really have to imagine a big thunderous applause right now, because that was such a brilliant ending to the program. Thank you, Patricia. That was fantastic, and your whole presentation. And I'd like to thank everyone for all this fantastic, thinking and music and playing. And I can only say I hope we do it again sometime.
Yes, indeed.
I think there has to be a part
Thank
two
you.
to all of this, because there's so much more we'd like to do. So I'm afraid we've run over in time. We want to really move on to our discussion. So Yiheng, would you please do the honors to take us to the next part of the program?
Thank you, Patricia in Florence, for your wonderful playing and leading us today, and Maria Rose, my colleague in upstate New York, and to all of our wonderful performers. I encourage you, our audience, to look at the program and find out more about our performers. They're all doing amazing work around the world with music, and support all of their creative efforts. It's my great pleasure now to introduce Vanessa Rose, who is Maria Rose's daughter also. Vanessa is the president and CEO of the American Composers Forum, which is a wonderful and large organization here in America. Vanessa is a leader of great vision and passion, and it's such a privilege to have you with us, Vanessa, today to lead us in our talk entitled Women in Music, Has Anything Changed?
Thank you so much. Thanks so much to the Catskills Foundation, Academy of Fortepiano Performance, and of course, Maria Rose and Yiheng Yang for inviting me to join you today. And bravo also to all the performers. I was clapping here in my room. A little bit about me. In addition to the honor of being Maria Rose's daughter, I'm a Western classical violinist and arts leader. I've worked in orchestras, opera companies, theater spaces, and artist collectives with a broad range of artists, administrators, and audiences. And I am joining you today from Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is also the native ancestral land of Dakota and Ojibwe nations. This is where American Composers Forum is based, where I'm president and CEO. ACF is a national organization that supports and advocates for living composers and music creators. Equity is a central focus of our work. And I just want to take a moment today, given our program, to make a distinction between equity and equality. Equality assumes that we arrive with the same privileges and opportunities. Equity acknowledges that there are many barriers to participation, whether by circumstance, prejudice, or other reasons. I also wanted to open this by talking about why do we single out women composers? I think everyone here would love to identify that the composers performed today are simply wonderful artists, regardless of their gender. But we're not yet a society that equitably includes different genders in our programming. In other words, we must name them as women to point out who's missing from most programs, which continue to be majority white men, whether they lived in the 1700s or today. I know that Gilly talked, for example, about the visibility and invisibility of women, for example. I'd also like to acknowledge the composers we're speaking about are white women in Europe with a fair amount of privilege, whether class, wealth, or access. There were, of course, many other women creating music around the world at that time. So our panel theme is a question of whether anything has changed for women in music. We'll only be able to scratch the surface, of course, in this panel, but I think you'll find that this panel already demonstrates greater diversity in this music than the composers on the program. I'd like to open the floor for our panelists to share a little bit about your own background and how your experience reflects changes for women in music today. Shall I invite the first person who's brave? Vivian, please join. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think this is really, it's an important question to be asking across the board, whether in dealing with the European white classical tradition or contemporary music. So I've been preoccupied for a good, 25 years with questions of greatness and genius and importance. And I've followed those questions through my earliest excavation of historical women composers over a decade. But nowhere did they become more significant and pertinent than in my doctoral dissertation and the research around it about antebellum piano variations that were composed, improvised, and performed by female keyboardists for their own domestic pleasure and inspiration. I also delved deeply into the domestic context and the attached questions of whether that context could generate any greatness or genius or importance. In the Georgian era, while I was on a Fulbright in the UK, and in association with the Sound Heritage Project that brings the musical worlds of English country homes to light. And the persistently narrow standards of what makes music great or important are challenged by investigations into these marginalized contexts, and also by many of the works and practices uncovered. The compositional forms may be more miniature, and the formulae for preluding and variation might be adhered to. But there are often striking and very demanding pieces that speak to a high level of creativity and accomplishment coming out of the domestic realm. Because of surrounding myself these past 15 years or so with researchers and musicians who ask really similar questions to myself, I had begun to labor under an illusion that some of the rigid hierarchy had dissipated, at least in the scholarly realm, in musicology, and in terms of what's identified as important or great or works of genius. But I recently had the experience of being commissioned by a women's music journal to write an article about a Georgian woman composer, keyboardist I had discovered and researched, named Martha Greatorex. And having completed the article and submitted the musical examples, I was confronted with the question from the editor of why I thought her music and history were important, given that she was composing and publishing at the same time as so many famous people. So that kind of stopped me in my tracks and made me realize that we're still grappling with these questions of how we determine importance. And obviously this is a whole conversation unto itself, but I just wanted to bring that, those particular issues forward.
Thank you so much. Yeah, what a great example why this conversation is so important. I want to make sure Patricia has an opportunity to contribute because, as you may or may not know, there's a curfew in Italy, and we'll have to lose her soon. So thank you so much for staying up late and staying here with us. Would love to hear your thoughts on that question.
I was mute, sorry. So thank you very much for letting me doing this, which is very important to me. And I must be honest and tell you that I'm quite new to this topic. And I'm really, my interest is always growing, but I think this is actually significant, and it's replying to your question. The fact that I never thought about women composers during my whole career until now, it is telling us something. So why don't we think about women composers at all? And
thank you so much. Yeah, what a great example why this conversation is so important. I want to make sure Patricia has an opportunity to contribute because, as you may or may not know, there's a curfew in Italy, and we'll have to.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Continue.
Okay. I wasn't sure what's going on. Sorry. So yeah. And then when I started looking for more information about women, then I found the following fact, that they are always presented, and I've done the same, I must be honest as well, always presented in relation to men of the same time, instead of focusing on the importance, or not importance, it doesn't matter, of their work, but instead of focusing on their particular work and their achievements and what they've done, it's nice to have a context and know how was the historical time they were living, or who were the contemporary composers around them. But I think it's quite significant the fact that it's always there's always a male name attached to their names, right? So then I was thinking, wow, why is this? So I think, well, even if now we are getting to know more about women composers, and I think it's very interesting also what Vivian was saying about the importance or not importance of a particular work. But even so, even if it's not important, why don't we know about them? I mean, first, I think we must have a complete picture of the historical time, including the compositions and including all the people that were composing, or most of them at least, the ones that actually were famous at the time, at least those. And then maybe we can decide which works are worth it to introduce in concerts and in programming, right? So yeah, I can only say that my experience. So from not knowing anything or not even thinking about women composers, because we always learn from the greatest geniuses, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, and they are. But why don't we have a bigger picture, including more people, and at least we can compare those works, or at least we can have some knowledge about them. And then the next step that I took when I started to get interested in women composers, and I always found them related to other male composers. Yeah. So I think this is the only thing that I can tell you, because I'm quite new in the field, even if I'm very interested.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that speaks to how there's still the centering, right, of the white male. And yes, these are all wonderful composers, and there are also wonderful other composers that we haven't yet discovered for many reasons. Lucy, I know you wanted to add to this conversation. Would you like to come in next?
Yes, thanks. Sorry, I lost my connection, so I didn't follow everything from the beginning, but I managed to go back. And indeed, from what I could hear now about Patricia, that's true. For instance, Marie Bigot, she is a little bit known because maybe potentially Beethoven was in love with her, or you always need to have some famous composer which said that the playing of the woman composer was good, or that they could be recognized. That's for sure. But what I wanted to add is that I think it's also something which is even deeper, even in the society layer, even cultural. Because if you see, of course, most of the women, till a certain extent, were from the aristocracy, or finally, if they could be professional, they had much more chance if they were coming from a musician family. But that's also when Gili said about questioning about the mother. Where is the mother of the two daughters in the picture composer that she played? You can see the father, and it's the same in the Mozart family. The fact is just that the woman position is not supposed to be there. And saying about my own personal things, I'm coming from my father's side on a aristocrat family, and I still could experiment that myself. My father happily, if I can say, broke with the tradition, but I can still see on my aunt's generation, or even on some of my cousins, is that what is very important is that you do a good wedding, and that you then after have kids. And if you see even me in the genealogical tree, I'm not written because I'm a woman. So it's like, it's just reflecting even now in the 21st century or 20th century. I was born in the 20th century. It's just reflecting just something where the women are in the back. And that's just a fact. Yeah, this is, I really could experiment that. And about this Salon, music, I also experimented it in my youth, because there was this era in the small salon of my grandparents' house where we were all playing for each other, or I was always having to do the musical moment for the guests or for the family, and that was really wonderful. This is for sure. And it was also very welcome that I played the piano, and but indeed, to become a professional, it was something a bit like, what are you really doing in your life? Like, this is not really meant to be. And this I could really feel. And so this is still there. And this was even more strong in the generation before. So what I'm really, that's why I even admire even more these women, because if they went to perform, to play, to compose, it's for them, it was like something they could not escape somehow. It was like a need which was above everything, for this love for music and for art. And this I found really touching.
Yeah, beautiful sentiment. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks also for sharing your experiences. Sonia, you would like to respond to this?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I have the benefit of thinking about this question about changes for women in music in the context of time, a little bit of time, because it's at least a couple decades now, including my music education, that I've been making music and, you know, listening to music. And I'd say that what we're going through is a major paradigm shift in music and music making. When I think of what life was like over 20 years ago when I was studying music as an undergrad, we focused solely on the music of the Western European canon, and really anything else was considered fluff. Music of non-European composers or women composers were like music that you throw at the end of a recital for fun, but they didn't warrant the same kind of research or effort that, you know, the core canon did. And, you know, over the past 20 years, I feel like I've seen higher representation of women in orchestras, women conductors, higher representation of women in leadership roles at music institutions and arts organizations, and even programming that focuses on music and contributions of women composers. And I think the reason why it's important to really think about this is because it's, in a way, what we're doing, what we're seeing happen is a restructuring of the canon. and creation of new canons. And that's a great responsibility. And I think we can look at kind of the past to also kind of get a sense of what does what we are doing right now mean. You know, they say like love is an action. You know, like, have you ever heard that before? Like, you're not just in love. It's something that it requires, it's action. And I think canons are the same. It's the same thing. We are the ones that create the canon. We know about Bach because of Mendelssohn, right? We know about all the works that have been decided as the core, the core repertoire because of the publishers, because of the music makers, and guess what? That's us now. and so here we are in this time where I think, there's so much work, there's so much action to do, there's so much work still to do. But we are, getting a chance to think about what is our canon? And that is important because it plays a role in culture, it plays a role in tradition. Obviously, the more diverse that the canon is the more that society can see themselves represented in that canon. And you will get kind of artistic and cultural experiences that would have never happened before. So we are, I'm not trying to like paint a rosy picture of where we are. I guess I'm just saying that I think it's important to name it for what it is. And that those of us that are, do have a seat at the table to shape the direction that things go in, how important our role is in kind of creating, this kind of new canon that reflects a more diverse society, and we all benefit from that. So I think that's all I'd like to say on that point.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Yeah, it is. Well, as a woman leader, I can definitely say there's a sea change happening, and yet so many conversations I have to have pretty repeatedly, as I'm sure many of you have experienced. And just to add to a lot of the conversation we have at ACF is about not centering one musical art form. If you're creating music, whether it's in jazz, classical, in fact, we try not to use classical because it can be very exclusionary. All of these are very valid art forms and forms of music. And we're also whole people. You're not creating music based on one particular identity or one particular background. And I really enjoyed reading in your bio, for example, Sonia, that you perform a vast repertoire, and you're also very connected to the Caribbean music of your parents in the native country of Jamaica. And yes. I wonder if you could just speak to that too, like this vast, this rich tapestry of music influences and how you approach music, for example, the program today, how that really inspires you, informs how you approach that as a musician.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, kind of going back to some of what I was saying earlier, some of that repertoire that I've had the great privilege of learning and performing many different places. For instance, there are these beautiful arrangements of Jamaican folk. My family is from Jamaica. These Jamaican folk songs that are very pianistic and beautifully set and arranged. And I, would take that to a major teacher and say, oh, I'd like to perform this on my recital. And they're like, well, instead of 6 of them, just do 2, or if I wanted to do some more research and maybe do a more in-depth writing paper on this topic, it was kind of like, well, why don't you write about Brahms, So I think one of the things that I'm enjoying now that, I'm not kind of having to, when I do have, I guess how I should say it is, when I do have the opportunity to present this music, I take full advantage of it because it is so important. Folk music has, first of all, influenced, classical music, from the very beginning. And so I think, one of the things that I love about having that connection to folk music and a culture that feels, like home to me is that I can also relate that to other genres that I experience, and kind of having a deeper understanding of how important the folk popular music is, the music of the people. I mean, ultimately, I think that's kind of where a lot of the music grows from, but we choose to pretend like it doesn't.
Thank you so much. Yeah, great points. And it just opens up the space in so many ways to think about music in that way. Gilly, I know that you've studied Clara Schumann quite a bit as well. I wonder if she would even imagine us having this conversation today. Wondered if you might share a little bit more about your experience.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. I mean, actually, something that Sonia was just to pick up from there, pick off up and up from there. This notion of the responsibility that we happily carry to restructure the canon and the world that surrounds it. And as you were saying that, Sonia, I was thinking that hand in hand with that. There's also the matter of creating a space, an inclusive, inviting, welcoming space to discuss, restructure, deconstruct, and reconstruct again. And in that sense, I'd like to thank all of you for together, all of us creating this space for each other, which I think is it's meaningful and important. I know I must say when the idea of the panel, when Yiheng and Maria were telling us about it, I was quite nervous initially. I think, there's perhaps for me, perhaps a certain line between thinking of all of these things intellectually and, sourcing out and reading about and researching and thinking of other people, and then applying it to myself in my own life. And it's not a line I cross all that often, I found, as I was preparing myself and thinking about today. I sat down with my husband and I was, saying, I'm not really sure if I have anything of value to contribute. What can I, what do I have? And then, as we were talking, I realized that actually, I suppose I do, but the other side of it, of course, is that if this wasn't such a welcoming, inclusive environment, I would not have necessarily felt comfortable. And I think that's a very important part of our work, right? To create these spaces where we can feel comfortable to share in this way. So thank you.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. And I'm very glad that you agreed to serve in the panel meeting. We're very happy to have you here. Yiheng, I'd love to turn to you now and ask you also specific about being a Chinese American and how you're approaching this music, how you integrate that background into the performance of these European women of the 1700s and the other music that you approach today.
Thank you, Vanessa. Loved hearing everyone's experience. It's so inspiring. Specifically as a Chinese American, my parents came to the United States in 1970 and loved classical music and encouraged me and supported me to study. And I've been very fortunate to have a life in music and to teach and perform. I think I grew up in two parallel cultures the whole time growing up in America, in a Chinese and in American culture. I had to constantly figure out what that was as a child, which looking back was quite a challenge. I think the positives of that is I was always trying to think, I learned how to think outside of the box and sort of defy the expectations of either the Chinese or the American culture that I was navigating. And that, I think, gave me a lot of skills as a musician because we're in the business of interpreting things and challenging preconceptions of art. So I've certainly had my share of, times where I think being a minority, either in my race or my gender, has affected how people perceive me and my work. We all want to be judged on the quality of our work, but there's a layer of perception, cultural, subconscious bias that is applied to us as public, visible performers. And I've struggled and questioned whether people were perceiving me a certain way with these identities in my race and my gender. But what's so inspiring for me about a salon like today and watching and listening to all of this music is that my idea of what is good music has been opened simply by hearing new repertoire and by meeting musicians I didn't know as well, and hearing how brilliant you all are at performing. And that just goes back to what Vivian Montgomery brought up in the beginning of this panel, is that as we are musicians of the Western canon, there's this idea of genius that has been also brought in. The canon and the geniuses, the wild-haired white men that have become the brands and the figures of this canon. And we love them. But as a woman, we come up against that. We're constantly compared to that image in people's perceptions, in audiences' perceptions. And the more I have been in the professional world, the more I bristle at that comparison. But, ultimately, as a teacher and performer, like Sonia was saying so wonderfully, it's up to us to reshape that conception of what does a pianist look like? What does a composer look like? She does not just have to look like what we have accepted in our education or what is of the past. We have a very interesting moment right now in our world to reshape that. And just lastly, I found a wonderful quote that really encapsulated that, which was actually by Tressie McMillan Cottom, who's a MacArthur Fellow here in the United States, very wonderful intellectual. And I listened to a podcast recently in the New York Times regarding being a minority. And she said, part of being Black and being a woman is in this country is that even when you're very successful, you don't just control the terms of your success. My success is always limited by how well other people can imagine the possibility of me. And that was really powerful to me, because it's that we, as musicians, we have so much power over the imagination in the music that we share. And, we have an opportunity to change that. So.
Yeah, so empowering. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Patricia, thank you so much. I know we just say goodbye to you.
Thank you, Patricia.
I'm so sorry that I have to leave. I feel like when you ask your parents, can I stay 5 more minutes? Because all you're saying and sharing is very inspiring, and I'm really grateful to be here, and that you have counted on me for this. So thank you, and well, the best of luck for all of you. And yes, everything we do counts, and we have this opportunity of promoting this, I think, well-deserved music to be heard. So thank
you so much.
Thank you.
Be safe, be well. We just have a few minutes left remaining anyway, actually. And I wanted to pivot a little bit to, we've established some of the changes that have indeed happened. Obviously, progress is still needed. And I wonder if we might turn to you, Vivian. You've done quite a lot of research and work on women-centered projects, and would love to hear some of your thoughts on what's next. How do we continue to make this progress?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I wanted to focus on one specific element, which is the problem of how we look at and take into account circumstances, and especially women's experience of very different circumstances, and how moving forward we look both in historical music and also in music that's yet to come, how we take into account and kind of weave in our understanding of the stories, and especially in the case of obstruction. And I personally feel like this age that we're living in, and the and especially the experience of Me Too, of the Me Too movement. While I'm so grateful to see harassers and abusers, being brought to account. I'm actually even more impressed by how we've come to recognize the ways in which women's progress, their expression, their development is obstructed and steered by their circumstances. And often those are circumstances that are dictated by, and in some obvious cases, very much imposed from without by the male culture. And I wanted to mention that, I brought forward this article I had written about Martha Greatorex, and I have to say, I know for a fact that she is important. Her music is important, significant, partially because it's wonderful music, but partially because her disappearance, her near invisibility, and her constant comparison to her very famous brother, the ways in which she was kind of steered by her ambitious father towards being a tradesperson, while her brother was steered towards being famous and, well regarded by the larger world. That is an important part of her story. And I find that I don't even want to let go of that interweaving of story and circumstance. And sometimes I feel like we're being asked to let go by the idea that we want women and other marginalized populations to rise to such a level of recognition and appreciation that we don't even notice who they are or what their story is, and or what their circumstances, or what their obstacles were, what was their trauma, and instead I want us to be able to live with and embrace and understand and dig deeply into those stories, while opening ourselves up to their art, and doing everything we can to kind of bring their art to light and to the attention of the larger public. So I guess I have to say that I think that in terms of what next, on so many levels, is our great challenge, and perhaps our great inspiration, is how are we actually going to embrace the narratives that are being presented to us in such vivid and sometimes inspiring and sometimes horrific ways, and to make that part of how we appreciate and listen to and elevate the work of composers and musicians in general.
Absolutely, 100% agree with you, and that context so much matters, and those stories really matter. We focus very much on storytelling because at the end of the day, we're people and we connect as humans. Music is our vehicle to share those perspectives and emotions and experiences. And I really so appreciate this panel. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of our listeners. Again, thank you to the Catskill Foundation and the Academy for Fortepiano Performance. And all of you, please continue to support women. Whether you're a woman, man, or another gender identity, it takes all of us to be part of this conversation. Listen to the music, support the women around you, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you to all of my wonderful colleagues. Just really, really inspiring.
Thank you so much.
And I would just like to add one brief thought, which occurred to me while we were talking, because we're almost all of us are pianists, and we're all fortepianists, and we're all kind of exposing not only the world to music by women, but we also have a lot of experience offering alternative piano sounds, and I see a kind of a parallel in that there have been these ebbs and flows in history where women have had more or less opportunities. There have been little windows where they seem to, have more agency at other times. And then there's this massive 19th century, male-dominated structure, rather repressive structure. And I see some of the parallel with pianos and the way the modern piano has kind of dominated the field. And so I think we can also experience those same explorations in terms of our instrument as well as the music. Thank you, Vanessa, for hosting this, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you, and be well. Bravo, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, really wonderful. I really appreciate being included.
Oh,
yeah, it was great to have you.
Loved hearing your research. We could have a whole salon just on what you've been working on these decades.
Well, I think we need to have part 2 and have you all back again.
Yes, I agree. A part 2 is needed.
Yeah.
This was wonderful. Thank you all.